没什么，你以为你是大牌，你以为干嘛又来？我的事，我的命，我的现在我要说够了，回头了，说够了，想透了，说够了，上太够了，说够了。受够了，别回头了，受够了，想透了，受够了，伤的够了，我说够了。犯了什么错？你说你知错，希望我记过，我该怎么做？心中矛盾，我希望摆脱三番四次你重复压迫，希望你知道我到底有多少次其实忍受难过。朋友说过你人心堕落，我却让事实闪过，你在眼前，我当谎言说心中要祸，每天以泪洗面，感觉自己懦弱，做了那么多，经过多少弹错，我没在你人性突破，还是算了吧，该丢了吧，用不着藏在心里忍受，对牛弹琴终究是为了什么？你以为你是大牌，你以为干嘛又来？我的事，我的命，我的现在我要。
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival live stream. My name is Jackie Sadashige, and I'm one of the social media managers for PATH. I'll be moderating today's filmmaker Q&A for the feature film George Nakashima, Woodworker. We're here with John Nakashima, the director of the documentary, and Mira Nakashima, a designer, director of the Nakashima Woodworkers and daughter of George Nakashima. And we'll be taking audience questions, so make sure to type your audience questions into the comment section. Why don't we start out with introductions? Mira, John, I don't know who wants to go first. Say hello to our viewing audience, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Mira wants me to go first, so I'm going to say that I have a full-time job for the last 46 years with West Virginia Public Broadcasting. So I've been in Appalachia. I'm a Asian American in Appalachia, and you know, I've made documentaries for much of that time. This is my first indie documentary, and well, I'm going to do one more, I think. So. And Mira, who are you?
I'm your cousin.
Oh my God.
I was born in Seattle, Washington, and we were incarcerated in Minidoka in 1942, right after I was born, and came to New Hope, Pennsylvania in 1943, and we've been here ever since. My father died in 1990 after building his furniture business for almost 50 years, and I have been in charge of the woodworking operation ever since, and I've been working at Nakashima's for over 50 years now, 51 years. And cousin John Terry, was working on that documentary film for at least 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before it was completed. And we did research together in the beginning. I managed to publish a book called Nature, Form, and Spirit from the documentary materials that Terry helped unearth. And it's just been an ongoing discovery of who Nakashima is. And I thank John Terry for digging out all those archival materials. We're still discovering stuff.
Yeah, there's we're in the Conoid studio, and there are how many buildings?
15
buildings in the complex. So this is where George and Marion and Mira and Kevin all lived, and it's where all the furniture was made. So he's one of the early woodworkers, right, who came up with that concept that has been repeated over and over and over and over again, that you build this little complex where you can you want to work on a table in the middle of the night, you just stumble out the door and go to the shop.
If you want to.
If you want to. I'm sure they don't.
It's really extraordinary. John, I have to ask, you landed in West Virginia, which I think for our Philadelphia viewing audience sounds like the middle of the woods. Were you drawn to West Virginia based on some sort of call to nature?
Well, Call to nature. No, I do love nature, but I went there because my brother Tom was a professor at the university there, and then he left me, and so he drew me there, and then he split. Uh,
And you stayed.
and I stayed because as far as like visual anthropology goes, I mean, West Virginia has some very real people uh, who remember things from centuries ago, and it's one of the few states left where you have such deep roots in folk culture. You know.
I love this metaphor, deep roots, right? This is the woodwork is just making its way into our conversation. At one point, there is a local woodworker, and he comments on how George saw an extraordinary thing in a piece of wood and says, this needs to be revered, this needs to be exemplified and remembered, which sounds a little like filmmaking. So, in addition to this particular project, can you maybe tell our viewing audience a little bit about some of the subjects you filmed and what documentary filmmaking does or brings to the audience? I'm thinking first of the project that you did focused on the children of West Virginia. I mean, that and compared to your uncle are two very, very different subjects. So what draws you to a subject?
Well, I think it's different all the time. I haven't noticed a pattern yet, and I'm pretty old, so. The reason I was assigned to make a documentary about child poverty in West Virginia, and it came around. I didn't really want to do a documentary about child poverty. There were so many of them, and I really wanted to offer solutions. And so it was called The First 1,000 Days, and it focused as compelling an argument as I could give for, valuing those first 1,000 days in shaping children's lives. And West Virginia needed that, and it's been pretty popular. I hopefully it does some good.
Do you feel that George as a subject needed the story need to be told of George?
Yeah, of course. I was like surprised. George was a very sophisticated uncle, and he had been on National Geographic, and I figured there were other documentaries that I didn't know about, and everything to be known about him was known. And then I discovered that a documentary hadn't been made about George after he died, unfortunately. I kind of noticed a trend in modern modern artists and documentaries that usually there's just one major documentary made about them, and that's it. So I really felt the weight of making this documentary, because I knew there was a good chance it would never be made, a second time. Although I'm going to archive everything so that everyone can, if they want to, 10, 15 years from now, go ahead.
Fantastic. Mira, the way that it's described, it really sounds like this was very much a collaborative project, that you had quite a hand in the creation of the documentary. Can you say a little bit about your role? Did you feel you were just a researcher? Did you have other sorts of input?
Well, in the beginning, when John Terry first started out, I thought he was making a film because he was brought up in the Midwest and his mother was Caucasian. So he didn't really know very much about Japanese culture. And he said from a young age, he had wanted to do a documentary film on my father. But unfortunately, he didn't get to it until after Dad was gone. So that meant digging around and trying to figure out. And about the same time, well, my father passed in 1990. And about the same time when Terry started thinking about doing research, I was trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with this business that he left behind. And why did he do what he did? And how did he do what he did? So I was curious as well. And, between the two of us, we had some theories. I guess we developed theories from thinking about things and looking up things about what made Dad tick. And in the beginning, we did go on several significant research trips together. We went to India and met some of the elders that my father had known in Pondicherry in the 1930s. And then we went to Japan and met some of the people who had worked with Dad in our sister company called Sakura Seisaku Show since 1964 when we first met them. And we did interviews in both places, and they were really interesting. And then after a certain point, John Terry went off on his own and found a bunch of woodworkers who had a different viewpoint on who Dad was and why he did what he did. And I wasn't involved in that half. I was only involved in the first half.
Also, I discovered that the experts that I interviewed, and even family members like Marion, George's wife, didn't really know the story of his search, his hero's journey. And when I discovered it's in his book, it's in his autobiography, but it's quite condensed. And I thought, I really need to flesh this out, because I really, it's really a compelling story about how you take ideas and experiences and turn it into something solid, something creative. And I thought it was a good time. I mean, over the years, I began to convince myself that it's a good time for people to focus on someone who searches, for answers, rather than just like stepping in, like learning some software and just, I can do that, like thinking about why you create and what the traditions that you come from take you to, and the spirituality of creativity. He just used all of that. I mean, he was very economical. He learned all these things and he utilized every bit of it, from my perspective.
It's such an inspirational story, and you're absolutely right about being economical. I mean, who would imagine that one would end up learning Japanese carpentry while in an internment camp? I mean, it's just one of the many extraordinary moments. He comes off as being such an iconic and imposing and serious figure. So again, I have to ask, are there aspects of his personality that are missing? We don't really see him laughing or joking around, for instance.
Well, he did joke around, but it was pretty dry humor, don't you think?
I don't know. I mean, because I was his daughter, I saw the strict side of him and the angry side of him fairly often. So, and a lot of people never saw that side. So,
yeah, I mean, there were many facets to George that I could have included.
That's okay.
But they became tangents.
Mira, did you have any qualms about somebody from inside the family making this film?
Oh no, we were really happy that it was somebody from inside the family who had known him and was curious about him and was kind of open to discovery. Because I think a lot of people from the outside would come in with some preconceived notion of who George Nakashima was and why he was important and so forth. But somebody in the family who doesn't really know, I mean, even I couldn't figure out what made him tick. But exploring those possibilities was interesting. you know, because you never know what you were going to, at least I never knew what I was going to discover. And it was, well, as I said, we're still discovering things about it.
Yeah, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to blow it. You know, I didn't want to make something that was frivolous or just superficial. Um, and by just me discovering, none of the experts have the answer,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to find the answer. I have to like get the 3 PhDs that
Dig deep.
it seemed like to have enough knowledge to be able to tell the story with credible. It was very difficult. That's why it took so long. Of course, a lot of life got in the way too. But
John, you speak with a kind of reverence about this notion of having a life with a purpose. And again, I think it's amazing that you see in someone like George, someone who doesn't really discover his purpose in life for decades. I'm wondering if the researching, learning so much about this individual has had an effect on either one of you, like changing your life views.
yeah,
You both seem pretty dedicated as well. You both seem to have like an aspect of that, like frankly.
yeah. Well, I was, all I was saying to myself is, don't die before you finish this.
Now it's okay.
Because I just once again I just really felt the weight, and feeling that weight for 20 years, growing weight, getting heavier and heavier, trying to represent Japanese American, Asian Americans, and even like Indian beliefs and Hindu beliefs, and just the collectors of George Nakashima are such a devoted, loving bunch of people. And in the extras, Bob Abel talks about this. He's owns a gallery in Philadelphia, and when it's people's end of life time, and they're downsizing, he's seen person after person and family after family, crying as their George Nakashima furniture was taken away for the auction. It's something families grew up around, and even people who couldn't afford it. There was one man, right, who just got one piece a year or something like that.
Yeah, there was one family who bought one chair a year until they had a whole dining set, and they lived nearby, and they were they were friends.
Mm-hmm.
But,
What a wonderful story. And that Mira, then when you took over, there must have been such a sense of, well, I don't know, was it a burden, a sense of obligation, the weight of the expectations?
yeah, can I go back a little bit to
Absolutely.
the interviews that Terry was able to do of some of our major former clients, the Krosnicks and the Liveschutzes were two major collectors in the Princeton area. And the Bernarda Sean was one of one of Dad's, the Dan and Bernarda Sean and their families were very good friends of the Nakashimas, and to be able to interview them and ask them the questions he asked and get the stories that he got from them was such a beautiful thing. I mean, they're not with us anymore, but we have those stories, and they're so precious, and I'm really glad that you did that. And I guess I had something to do with arranging the interviews, but I'm so glad we did, and we were able to record them and their feelings about their furniture and my father and mother themselves. Anyway, can you ask your question again? I forgot.
That's sure. No, that's wonderful, and just that little mention about how you had a role to play in getting the interviews together. I mean, you are a figurehead, so I was wondering. I mean, you're somebody who studied architecture in your own right, and you're now the Nakashima of Nakashima Woodworkers. So, when you took on that mantle, could you say a little bit about maybe any sense of like feelings of obligation, burden, high expectations? Like, what was that like?
That was pretty scary. In the beginning, I wasn't sure what we were going to do, but my father had just finished this big show, the only retrospective he'd ever done of his furniture at the American Craft Museum, which was now MAD, but it was American Craft Museum at the time. And the show traveled, and there were so many sales generated from that show that we had a 3.5 year backlog. And in addition to the new orders that came in because of the show, our devoted clients, the Krosnicks, had an entire house full of furniture, and it burned to the ground just after his show opened. And so they came over and they were devastated. They were people who had been collecting all kinds of things for their entire lives and had this big, beautiful house just crammed full of Nakashima furniture. And they were devastated. They came in and said, "George, what do we do?" And Dad said, "I'll help you rebuild everything in that house." So he did. He started it, and then he had a stroke, and then he died the following year, so he couldn't complete the project. But it took us 3.5 years to finish that. So I felt that I was obligated to carry on the promise that Dad had made to the Krosnicks. And also we had this tremendous pile of wood that he had purchased, I think probably over 100 walnut logs in the few years before he passed. And he'd gone to the sawmill and milled them all, and he intended to make something with those. And the wood was stored down in Philadelphia, and John has a wonderful interview on the extras of the film. I don't know if it was shown at your festival or not, but about Robert Thompson, who was the son of the man who took care of our wood in Philadelphia, Thompson Mahogany Company. And they've been very patient all of Dad's life, because the old Mr. Thompson had made this promise to Dad that he would take care of his lumber, and they could keep it for him until he was ready to use it. And then as soon as Dad was gone, they said, "Get this stuff out of here. It's all random shapes and sizes and dropping bark all over," and they couldn't move it by machines. They had to move it all by hand, and it was they thought it was sort of a crazy idea anyway. But Dad was really grateful to have their support and their expertise in milling and drying lumber, and they were our main source of lumber. And I thought at one point, what am I going to do with all this wood? There's no place to store it on the property. And I looked for places off campus where we could store the lumber, and that didn't seem to make any sense. And then so we decided we would build another lumber shed. And we were already overbuilt on our 10-acre property, or it's less than a 10-acre property. And so we had to get a variance from the zoning board and told them that our new woodshed would be a temporary structure and we would probably use it up within 20 years. Unfortunately, it's still there.
Should you be saying this?
What? Oh, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be. But
Ellen I is listening.
Uh-oh. It's out of the bag now. But I just felt an obligation. This was our legacy. This is our inheritance from George, and we needed to make it into something. And lumber, Dad would often say, "Oh, I don't want to insure that lumber because it's just junk until you make it into something." So he never even took insurance on it. And after he died, we decided we better have some insurance. But I mean, that was our most valuable resource, and it was the legacy that he left behind. He milled all this lumber himself with some intention of making things with it. So we're still working on the wood pile.
but talk about a hero. I mean, all the woodworkers and all the customers. It was assumed since George died, that there wouldn't be any more furniture, and
That's true.
Mira took up the mantle. George had trained you in certain things. He was like a Zen master who, just thought things and hoped that Mira picked them up.
Well, he did insist that I go to architectural school too. And he sent me to Japan after I did undergraduate here, and that was a really good move. I'm really glad. It was tough because I not only did not speak Japanese, but I did not have any drafting training at Harvard undergrad, and all of my classmates had had 4 years of drafting, and so I had a lot of stuff to catch up on. But it was really a very good experience. It was the atelier system, so you're actually working with a practicing architect on, sometimes you go to the site themselves and oversee the building in real life. So that was really good experience. And Japan is so detail oriented. The drawings that we did and the competitions we did, we would my classmates and I would spend all night, talking about this stuff and what the approach we were going to have with this particular project. And of course, everybody had different ideas, and then we would have to compromise and put them together and come up with something that we thought might win a prize. I don't think we ever did, but it was fun trying.
John, I think Mira's being very humble at this moment.
I think so.
And
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I was going to ask this of her, but I'm going to ask this of you. Do you sense her hand that some of the furniture design has shifted or evolved, or even slightly now that she's come into her own? Or Mira, if you care to answer that as well,
I think she could answer that. I mean, she's doing her own designs, of course. She has been for many decades, maybe.
Well, yeah, in the beginning, I was accused, or the shop was accused of just making reproductions of my father's designs. And Bob Abel, who's featured in the film, he said, well, you've got to prove to the world that you are a designer in your own right. You have to develop your own designs and name them, and I will have a show for you. So, bless his heart, he did have several shows for us with new designs and new names of things, and he fostered that. So did Mrs. Krosnick. She said, I want you to make something like George would never make, and just make sure you do it differently than your father would. So I did have support from different people.
But the interesting thing is, Mira picked up the mantle from George when George was like at his height, in a way, before his stroke, when he was making his boldest and most exuberant work. So you started at a real high point and continued on from there.
Well, it went down for a while. After 3 years, we ran out of work, and I didn't know what to do. And then Bob Abel and Bob Hunsaker, who was our PR person at the time, says, well, he says, you got to, he told me about all these different things you have to do to make sure people know you're still there. And eventually we did come back. But it was largely thanks to Bob Abel for prodding me along and telling me how to write press releases. And Bob Hunsaker told me about the press release.
Which George never had to do, but for some reason,
he just generated
like everyone wanted to write articles about him. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was pretty incredible.
Yeah, he was unique. I mean, in the post-war years, there was a lot of anti-Japanese prejudice and anti-Asian prejudice in the U.S. And Dad just went on his merry way. He never turned against Japan or Japanese culture. He embraced it. It was he loved Japan. He loved the Japanese culture. He loved Japanese aesthetics. And in a way, he kind of brought that to the USA in the 40s and 50s. And he did get a lot of publicity about it. And but he was so interesting. People wrote about him all the time.
He was in like Life and Look and, National Geographic and, the list goes on and on for pages after pages,
Everything from the sort of embrace of Indian philosophy, the reverence of nature, he just really seemed ahead of his time. Some of that stuff seems to be coming around more conversations that we're seeing these days. We're coming to the end of our Q&A, so I I want to make sure that the two of you have an opportunity to let our audience know, John, if you have other projects that we should be looking for or how to watch your other documentary. Mira, I noticed that Nakashima Woodworkers is offering virtual tours. If you want to talk about that or anything else you've got going on, please do share with our viewing audience.
Well, my next project is I'm going to do a documentary about my brother, who's in his 80s. He's about to become 80, I think.
He's about the same age as me.
Yeah. And he's an incredible painter, and there's never been a major documentary made about him. The good thing is he's a living, so that'll make it easier.
Yeah.
Terrific. So another documentary in the pipeline. Mira, anything you'd like to share?
Well, I have a manager who's been with us now for 15 years, I think, and he went to RIT, so he has a background in design. He worked with Thomas Moser for 17 years before he came to us, and he realized years ago that unless we hire younger and younger woodworkers in the shop and train them in our way, that we're going to be out of business. So, I mean, he's very careful about the people we hire and the people we train, and we're very blessed to have a really dedicated working crew with us. I also have two assistant designers, one of whom is Hugo, our cousin, and the other one is Jason Neal, and he's in Mexico doing a residency right now. So we're a little short-handed, but and we hope that we will have a good design team and a good woodworkers team to work together. It's interesting. There's an overlap now between the designers and the woodworkers where there wasn't during my father's time. He was the designer, and you better do what he told, or you're toast. But one of my previous design assistants was of Indian heritage, and she was working alongside me for 3 years, and I thought we were getting along great. And she said, I really want to be in the shop and be on the bench and make things myself. So that's what she's doing, and she's wonderful. And there are two other people in the shop with design background, and they're happy making things in the shop, but they also have, they have good input on what happens in the shop. And we do drawings here, and we oversee everything in the shop, but having a woodworker's perspective on the projects is really good, and especially a woodworker with design background. And anyway, we hope we'll be able. We're trying to figure out the structure of things in the future, but in the meantime, because of the COVID shutdown, we do have a virtual tour coming up on November 20th. There will be at least 2 more after that, and then in the spring we will be opening up to in-person tours again. Limited, probably, unless COVID really does go away. They will be limited in number, but we will have tours. And we've been, I don't know if it's because of the shutdown, everybody was shut up in their own homes and decided they needed to improve them, but we've done a lot of business online. People will query through the internet or the telephone, and then we will, they'll gel their requests, and we go out to the woodshed and take pictures of what we think would work for their project, and they choose what they would like virtually a lot of times. Now they're beginning to come in a little bit to see the wood in real life, but it worked pretty well. I was surprised. We're very busy and very blessed to have work.
Well, that's fantastic news. John, Mira, thank you so much for spending this time with the Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival. Great film. Everybody, if you're watching, if you haven't seen it, you've got to see it. It has been called the definitive documentary on the life of George Nakashima. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hope to see you in the spring.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you.